What's up, Magical Misfits? Drew here, and today's video is inspired by a viewer. They left a comment. Thank you for your comment. And they said that they would like to hear me discuss conscious channeling a bit more. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I came in my studio today to meditate. I had no intention of filming a video. But when I started, I have a whole process, this little sort of entryway into meditation that gives me the potential, at least. It doesn't always work out. Like today, it didn't work out. Something else happened. But when I do get into meditation through that process, it gives me the best meditative state that I've ever been able to achieve. So I was going through that process, and very quickly it became clear to me that I was not going to be meditating today because I started channeling a little bit. It became clear to me that I needed to go ahead and make this video. First, let me apologize for the lack of content. I just really don't want to force content. I have not felt called until today to make a video. I did try to do a reading at one point, but it didn't feel right. It didn't pan out for me. So I really don't want to force content, and I just want it to be sort of organic and come as it should. So sorry for the sporadic uploads. Next, let me give my disclaimer. As always, I do not consider myself to be an expert or authority on any topic. Anything that I am about to share with you about channeling is just my own personal understanding, experience, the conclusions that I've come to based on what I see around me, and as I said, what I've experienced myself, or the information that I've been given. As always, do with it what you will. So first off, for anyone who's not familiar with what channeling is very common. People do it all the time. I've said on my channel, I think many times, that people do magic without ever realizing it all the time. It's very similar with channeling. People are channeling all the time and don't realize it. There are different ways that one might interpret the term channeling, like one might define that term. But generally, when we channel, we are opening ourselves to be a vessel for something. So like one that comes to mind real quick is medium. A medium is a channel. Now, typically in modern society, when we talk about mediumship, we are talking about someone who speaks with the spirits of deceased human beings, typically. But that is a form of channeling. Reiki and any other like energy work modality is channeling. The specific type of channeling that I am talking about is more akin, obviously, to the mediumship example here, but it's all channeling. You may or may not have heard of trance channeling. This is sort of, not the opposite, but this is why I make the distinction of conscious channeling, okay? Trance channeling, if you think about the Oracle of Delphi, that's trance channeling. You know, obviously, our modern understanding, at least the last I heard, was that breathing in specific gases that are coming out of the earth cause said trance state. So that's one way to enter into a trance state, right? Like substances. But typically when we're talking about trance channeling today, people just sort of have their own mechanism to sort of step back, and that's what's happening. They are consciously stepping back and allowing another energy, if you will, to use their voice box, their systems to communicate. So it's really crude, but kind of like a ventriloquist dummy, like they're speaking through. A really famous example of this today is Edgar Cayce. They called him the sleeping prophet. Another really famous one is Abraham Hicks. And these are I use these examples specifically because they are both very famous, but they're very different. So again, I said Edgar Cayce was called the sleeping prophet. So he would literally go into a trance state into which he was fully checked out, not there at all. And he was, as I understand the way it's been explained, tapping into a stream of consciousness almost. So like what we might call the Akashic record, he was channeling that. Whereas my understanding of what's happening with Abraham Hicks, with Esther Hicks, is that she is stepping back to allow an energy, entity, being speak through her. And she has some awareness of what's happening, but she really, like, she'd have to go back and listen to tapes to really specifically like know exactly what was said. And there's any varying degree in between. There are tons and tons of work out there of people who channel, who have channeled, a lot of groups. A lot of modern new age thought, whether people understand it or not, comes from some very famous specific works of channeled work that was done, you know, in the 50s and 60s and before, 30s, you know. With trance channeling, the, what I might call the lower mind, the mundane consciousness, is taking a back seat to higher consciousness, higher mind. There's a lot of words you could use to describe that. Like, again, I believe that Esther Hicks might say that it's an entity, a being, a master teacher, maybe even a collective. I'm not sure specifically, honestly. Whereas again, with Edgar Cayce, it wasn't anything like that. It was just the records of all that have ever been, essentially. Conscious channeling, we are not stepping aside. We are operating from a place of sort of a dualistic relationship between lower mind and higher mind, or lower consciousness and higher consciousness. We are sort of creating a space, again, my understanding of this, for there to be a shortening in the distance between these two things, and existing in the same field, the same body, the same, occupying the same space at the same time. Okay. I am sure, absolutely sure, that trance channeling has its own hurdles to work through, and you know, there are challenges to be overcome or whatever. But I don't know anything really, not personally, about that. There are many challenges when it comes to conscious channeling. The lower mind tends to, there are people who have consciously channeled, had information consciously channeled into them. Or even this, okay, it gets kind of slippery. It could be unconsciously channeled, but it's not trance channeling. Okay, there's probably a better term, and maybe they'll give it to me, or I will come up with it, or I'll hear it somewhere else at some point for what I'm talking about. But for now, I'm calling it conscious channeling, because we are always tapped in. Like, any person that's walking around on this earth right now is unconsciously tapped into higher spiritual planes and wisdom, and, you know, angels and guides and ancestors and spirit animals and the whole nine. Like, everybody is. But, you know, there are going to be some people walking around who have absolutely zero awareness that that's a thing. Well, there are going to be other people who are so tapped in that like all day, every day, 100% of the time, they are hyper aware that this is what's happening, right? And anything in between. So there are a lot of times where someone will have information. They've not entered into trance in order to channel, but they have had information given to them, and they've thought, well, that was just a random thought, or, you know, that was just, you know, a random feeling. And some people might even be like, well, you know, that was my intuition, and that's not necessarily wrong either. But the point I'm trying to make is it's really easy to dismiss and to be like, well, that wasn't anything. That was just a random thought I had. It didn't come from anywhere. It was from my own head. I made that up. it's certainly not higher guidance in some way, right? It's real easy to like shove it off as that. And like that's happening a lot. And part of that is, at least to my understanding, has to do with the fact that we are not consciously doing this work, building that muscle and that connection and creating this bridge. And actually what, as I understand it, what I see, which we'll get into that too, but what I see is like, so the higher mind is one frequency, the lower mind is another frequency. And then they're disparate. They're not the same. But through making these conscious connections, we, even if it's just for a moment, we bring them into closer alignment, even if it's just during that time. And the goal would be, for anyone who cares to do this, the goal would be to make that more of a consistent, constant thing. So when I sat down and I started doing my process that I go through for meditation, the first thing I do is this exercise called the Merkaba transference. And that's about high vibrational energy. And like, I can talk about that another time. But the next thing I did was to consciously connect to the energies or energy that I channel. And when I did, this whole thing like spilled out. The key to this is that, because I said, I want to connect. And the response was, you're always connected. And I'm like, but I want to consciously connect. And then there was, I saw a key enter a keyhole and turn. And I knew immediately what that meant. That's kind of how this works for me. This is going to work differently for different people. I think if you want to do what I refer to as conscious channeling, one of the first things you need to do is figure out how your system works. So for me, there's a combination of things happening, but the strongest is empathic feelings. The second is telepathic, just sort of information. And the third is visual. And then there's auditory, and then there's even smell. But different people are going to work in different ways. Again, there's this combination thing happening. I saw this image, but I immediately had all the information in my head as well as what that image meant. And it's that the key to, it sounds stupid to say it out loud. I wish I had more eloquent words to say it, but like a lot of these concepts are not easily put into the English language anyway. Anybody who does this sort of thing, we're just doing the best we can with what we have at our disposal. So the key to conscious channeling is to consciously connect. It sounds really stupid, but we are connected. Like I said, all the time, walking around all the time, you're connected. And you're getting intuitive hits, and you again may not be conscious of that at all. You've got they're giving you stuff, putting it there for you, but to what degree you are aware that that's even a thing affects how you receive that, and if you're aware of what's happening at all, right? Your ability to act on or to understand what is being given, to interpret it. And the more that we consciously connect in this way for this type of channeling, the stronger that muscle gets, the easier that gets. And obviously, if you want to sit down and you want to practice what I call conscious channeling, you're going to consciously connect. But you could be on your smoke break at work, whatever. And, oh, okay, I want to connect. If you are familiar at all with the concept of mindfulness, this is similar in that with mindfulness, so if you're doing the dishes, instead of just mindlessly doing the dishes while your brain is running through what you're going to do tomorrow or whatever, what happened today, whatever, you specifically put all of your attention and awareness to doing the dishes, smelling the smells and feeling the sensations and the visuals, and you are very much in that moment in what you're doing. And anytime your mind wanders, you bring it back while you're eating, whatever you're doing. That's you know, mindfulness in a nutshell. And it has a lot of very beneficial effects on a person. One example can be that it can help us to not get trapped in negative thought patterns, for example, right? Help us break the habit of doing that, right? There are a lot of benefits to mindfulness, but this is the same kind of thing. It's like the more we do this thing, it's very beneficial for that connection, but the more it'll also become sort of the default, because right now, for most of us, the subconscious, the unconscious is the default. And like, we need to consciously connect. We need to turn that key and say, okay, I want to consciously connect. We don't need to disconnect. We don't need to say, okay, I don't want to be connected anymore. I want to move on with the rest of my day, because unconscious is the default. So as soon as our attention is drawn away from that conscious connection, we are immediately in unconscious connection, and we are moving through our day. And they're in the background, whether we're aware of it, everything is still going on in the background, whether we have any awareness of that or not. And again, this is going to be varying degrees for everybody. First off, why is this even a thing? What does it matter? The information that has been given to me is that this is supposed to become the new norm, that this conscious connection and being able to consciously channel spiritual wisdom, guidance, and information is supposed to be the new normal, the way that people do this. And not that, that's not to say anything about trance channeling. I don't know. They don't talk to me about that. All that's ever come up with that is that is not for me. And that is not what I'm doing. And that's not why I'm here. And that's not how we work. So, like, I don't know. I have no negative or positive or like anything. Like, that's just a totally separate issue. That if you are interested in learning about trance channeling and understanding that better, there are going to be other people who would be far better suited to give you that sort of information, not me. So the whole reason that any of this conversation is even happening is because in the video I was talking about how I channel, and that I have difficulty with that sometimes. There are challenges, there are roadblocks for me in that. I would say, if we're going to start at 0, right? We're going to start at, obviously I just have some awareness. I finally have some awareness that there's something going on, and that there's more to all this, and that I might potentially be able to be psychic or communicate with higher intelligence, or, angels or guides, or whatever, however that looks for wherever somebody begins their journey. There's the hurdle of just believing that it's a thing, and that it can be done, and that I can do that thing. I am capable of doing that thing. So, a lot of us, I've never met anybody who just, and I'm sure they exist, but I've never met anybody who just woke up and was like, super, like, I don't, 3 years old, I don't care, whatever, super intuitive and totally, actually, I would say it would be easier at 3 years old. As an adult in particular, it would get harder and harder. But like, somebody who was super confident in their connection and never doubted their own intuition or their ability to receive guidance and interpret it properly and understand it properly, and the whole thing. Like, we all go through various stages with our comfort and our confidence in our own ability to be that antenna and that barometer, and to properly, first, to even make that connection, and then am I interpreting it right? Am I understanding it right? There are going to be levels to go through with this. So I would say, if I were giving advice to someone else about this, I would say meditation is going to be key. Having a meditative practice is going to really ground and center us in ourselves. Meditation, obviously, we're going within, but we're connecting with all levels of self and higher guidance. It's a place to listen and to learn. And, you know, that's as simple as starting with like really short, easy guided meditations and then building your way up to something that's more challenging when it comes to meditation, sort of sitting in a silent space and trying not to follow all the random thoughts, right? I would recommend working with divinatory tools to build your relationship with your own higher guidance and meditation, to build your confidence and your ability to understand and recognize that sort of guidance, or trust those gut feelings. If you see an animal and it feels significant, look into what the spiritual significance of the animal is. Crystals, all kinds of things can help open us to trusting and building and believing in our own intuition and our own connection with higher guidance. So those, I think, are huge steps. Another really huge step is something that I may be working on forever, is becoming a clear channel. So this is psychospiritual work, you know, doing your shadow work, doing your trauma work, constantly clearing out the clutter of the lower psychology, emotional makeup, to create a different frequency, one that's more compatible with higher guidance and with being that clear channel. I find for me, the thing that I was complaining about, the biggest hurdle right now, because I've done a lot of that work, I mean, still continue to do work, but I'm fairly confident in my connection and in my intuitive abilities to interpret what's being given to me and so on and so forth. I find it difficult to articulate a lot of the times. I'll be given something and I don't really know how to accurately translate that into English, because again, it's more telepathic and empathic than anything. So like, it can be very difficult sometimes to put these things into words. But I find that I often worry that my own trauma, shadows, or bias is influencing the message that's coming through me. This is something I am working on. It's another one of those things that if I were talking to someone else, what I'm going to say here is that if you feel that way, if like you receive guidance and information that you feel like you're meant to share, first and foremost, it's for you. It was given to you. And it may be for you to share with others, but it's for you first, always. And whatever is given to you because you are the appropriate vessel for the message. So even if it is tinged by your shadow, trauma, and biases as they stand in that moment, that is because that is relevant to the message somehow. I have a hard time getting out of my own way with this one. It's ego. It's my ego. And I think that this is totally normal. If you really truly want to be a clear channel, you just want to be a vessel for the energy of Reiki or the channeled message or the light language or whatever it is that you're doing, you just want to be open and you want spiritual truth to come through, and you don't want it to be tinged by something from a mundane point of view, something from an earthly point of view that might be detrimental in some way. But again, I'm not going to say that's impossible, but if that is your mindset and you do care and that is what you're working on and you are doing your clearing, you are doing your work to constantly clear not only your energy but the energy around you, then I know that the energy that I work with would not give me something that would be detrimental for me to put out. And so if I'm not in the appropriate space to put it out in its purest form, the purest I'm able to put it out, at the frequency at which it is meant to be put out, they're not going to give it to me. I don't know how else to say that. I think it's always important to do ego checks, to do gut checks. Like, is this me trying to, whatever? Because I have absolutely been around people who And I'm not saying that I'm not, like, again, like, this is something that we should constantly be checking in and being like, am I trapped? Am I caught in my ego? Because I have witnessed people who were in their ego and they were directing things and manipulating information and guidance in a way that was to their benefit. And that's gross. And I don't want to be that. And I would hope that any of you who are watching that are interested in this at all, in channeling, because again, right now I am talking about channeling information, basically, right? But energy work, when you move energy through your hands, that is channeling. And I would hope that the desire to do that and the calling to do that, whether it's with energy, whether it's with, again, channeled information, whatever that looks like, I would hope that that's coming from a place of, I'm struggling to find the words I'm looking for. I would hope it's coming from a place, a desire or a calling to do good, to be helpful, to, like, what I would call manifestations of service, like to be of service, to help, to be a light, whatever, like, rather than, you know, to get rich or to become famous, or I don't know, like, those things might all go hand in hand. But I truly believe that if your heart is not in the right place, you're going to hit a wall. You will only be able to go so far. And you might be able to be a charlatan and make it all up and fool the world, sure. But, and if that's your goal, great. But if you're really seeking, like, spiritual development, spiritual enlightenment, growth, you're not going to be able to attain it if you're not putting in the effort, if you're not meditating, if you're not doing your psycho-spiritual work, if you're not clearing the space. Because as I said, it's like this higher consciousness is one vibration, your lower consciousness is of another. And they need to, I'm not saying they need to be the same, but they need to be compatible. They need to be similar enough in order for you to, you know, get that spiritual wisdom, that spiritual information, that, you know, to become enlightened. I don't know. These are all words that I don't really, they're not right, but it's the best I've got. So yes, I think there's probably, I know there's got to be a better term I can use for what I'm talking about other than conscious channeling. But as of right now, that's the word I'm using to describe what I'm talking about. And it's basically maintaining a conscious connection and having spiritual guidance, information, wisdom given to the vessel, to the person, for them to do with what they will. So, I mean, a lot of people on YouTube, like I said, that are readers do conscious channeling while they're reading. There are bound to be tons of people who write spiritual literature who are consciously channeling. It's not like it's some new concept or anything. It's just, it's been brought to my attention that it needs to be a more normal, it needs to be normalized. It needs to be a thing that more people are doing, that they're aware that they're doing, that they're actively working toward doing. And again, you could put, there's a million different ways you could say words you could use from different spiritual communities, for example, sort of buzzwords that I'm not crazy about, but to describe these concepts, but you're really saying the same thing. I hope that I have said everything I wanted to say on this topic, because I just meander in these videos, you know I do. I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting. The one thing I do want to kind of finish out on is that this doesn't have to be some big grand thing. Like, you don't have to get up on YouTube and share your channeled messages. It can be very specific to you and what goes on in your life and on your path and what you need, the specific information and guidance that will work for you, rather than, you know, maybe a collective or a group of people. It depends on what you're called to and what matters to you and what that looks like, what you feel like you're meant to be doing here. And I personally do that regularly. Sometimes when I consciously connect. So I'm setting myself up for potentially conscious channeling. I'm just open, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, which is what happened today. I didn't have anything specific, but a lot of times I grab my iPad and I will type out specific questions that I want to ask, and I will connect and I will ask the questions, and then I'll type down the responses. And they're often, not always, but most often, just purely specific to me and what I want to know for my own development, or where I'm at on my journey thus far, or what have you. And while this information could be of benefit to other people, sure, that's not my intention in the moment. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. So there's that aspect of it too. You could also, I have done this with a friend. She'll ask questions and take notes, and I'm just sort of the go-between. I don't feel like that's my calling with channeling. And a lot of trance channeling is like that. They'll ask questions and they'll be answered, whatever. For me, it feels like it's more getting specific information for myself that might be of benefit to others later on as well. And also just consciously opening myself up for whatever information comes through, and doing with that whatever I see fit. Sharing it on YouTube, or sharing it with friends, or writing it down and keeping it for later, what have you. Yeah, as always, like, I don't know if any of this really made sense until I watch it back, like if I'm just rambling on and none of it really hangs together or not. But that's just how I do. That's just who I am and how I communicate. So there's a lot that I wanted to say, and it's not really one conscious stream of thought. And even if I make notes and I'm like, this is how I'm going to structure it, like it rarely works out that way, because I think of something else and I'm like, oh, in this and blah, blah, blah. But I think that I got the gist of what I have to say on the topic. Now I'm going to go away and I'm going to think about what I want to call this, or I'm probably going to ask them. I like to ask them. They give me, yeah, they tell me what to call things. And I'm often like, oh, yes, okay, that makes sense later. Like emanations, for example, like, what do I call this? It's emanations. And when I look up the word, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what that is. So I will probably go and ask them what I should call it, because conscious channeling just doesn't encompass it, because part of it can be unconscious. But again, I'm just trying to differentiate from trance channeling. So non-trance channeling, I don't know. Anyway, I hope that all of you are well, and who knows what my next video will be about or when I will upload it. But as always, I am thrilled to have you along as I journey through this experience. And until next time, much love and gratitude.